All right. Hi, Martin. Hi, Harry. Thank you so much for joining
Hi.
me here today on Vonvo.com. Today is April 6th, 2013. And just before we get started, I wanted to go over two quick ground rules. The first is that right now this conversation is being recorded, and after the recording is completed, I'll be uploading this discussion to YouTube, to the internet. Is that okay with both of you?
Yeah, sure. Definitely.
Great. And then on top of that, here at Vonvo, we're all about our discussions staying both civil and valuable. We don't want there to be any personal attacks against anyone. Is that okay with both of you?
That's fine with me, yeah. Definitely.
Okay, great. So then let's get our conversation started. Just because we have a bunch of people listening in, and for anyone who watches this discussion, Harry, would you mind quickly giving a background of yourself and why you're so passionate about this subject? And then Martin, you can go ahead and do the
Of
same thing.
course. I don't know how much time I have.
Go
Half a
ahead.
minute.
Yeah, take a few, 20, 30, 40 seconds, whatever you like. Go ahead.
Um, just want to first check before I begin. You can hear me, okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I hear
Great.
you just great.
Okay, my name is Harry Fear. I'm a
Go.
Great. My name is Harry Fear. I'm a documentary filmmaker, campaigning filmmaker from Oxford, UK. I'm in Gaza City, in the north third of the Gaza Strip in the Middle East. And in 2013, I will spend more than half of the year here making documentaries, reporting, and facilitating the visits of international activists, journalists, and human rights workers. Last year, 2012, I spent 3 months in the Gaza Strip working as an independent journalist and filmmaker, including during the recent 8-day war in November, when 59 Palestinians were killed, when Israel started Operation Pillar of Cloud. So my background is as a filmmaker and activist against the human rights abuses of Palestinians.
Okay, well, my name is Martin Sherman. I have a rather varied academic background. My original bachelor's degree was in physics and biology, my master's in business administration, and my doctorate in international relations and political science. I served in Israel's security establishment for 7 years. I lectured at various universities for over 20 years, mainly Tel Aviv University. And today I have a regular column in the Jerusalem Post, in which I deal with current affairs, ongoing matters, mainly in the Middle East, but also on wider international issues.
Great. So that's perfect. So what I was going to say is, we wanted to use this discussion today to talk about particularly the Gaza Strip. And so, Harry, since you're actually located inside of Gaza, would you mind just sort of giving your overall analysis on what's really going on over there? And then we can begin to transition, once we talk about what's been going on and what should be going on, we can talk about what should happen going down the road and how to handle this area.
Well, I think one important thing to say is, of course, history depends on where you start the clock, but I'll start the clock a few years ago when Israel unilaterally withdrew from the Gaza Strip. The point here was that it was no longer economically efficient for the Israeli military to run a colonization and occupation of the Gaza Strip because there was too much resistance. Whereas in the West Bank, the larger bit of Palestine that is left by the international community for Palestinians supposedly in the law, there is a difference, which is the colonization was much more efficient with regard to the amount of money it took to militarily police the settlement and colonization project. So Israel withdrew because it was no longer favorable for its national interests and greater aims for the region to occupy Gaza. So I'm here in Gaza City, which has been under Palestinian autonomy now for years. In 2006, in January, Hamas, one of the premier Palestinian political factions, was elected for the government. They have run or ruled, depending on your preferred language, the Strip since 2006. So their mandate is now 7 years old. Now, crucially, since that has happened, there have been two important features of treatment of Gaza. The first is the illegal besiegement policy, which collectively punishes most of the population who are children for the security of Israel, supposedly, or for certainly the mistakes of the adults. The second thing is notable state violence with respect to Israeli treatment of Gaza. So we had, for example, in winter 2008-9, Operation Kased, the so-called 22-day Gaza war, which saw the killing of hundreds of Palestinian children, as Israel not only bombed the Strip from the air and from the sea and from the land, but also actually incurred and invaded into Gaza. Now, we've also seen regular escalations in violence, which basically means Israel assassinates quote-unquote terrorists or militant resistance fighters. Again, you choose your preferred ideological language. And then there is retaliation, usually with rockets and mortars and etc., etc., etc. Point here is that last winter, Israel launched an operation which was supposedly that of a self-defense operation under very, very strange circumstances. In November, the first incidences of this were Israel assassinating people, including a mentally disabled man who walked towards the border with Israel. Israeli force was then responsible for the killing of a 13-year-old child. Following that particular incident of the child being killed, rockets were launched and other forms of, whatever you want to call it, armed force were exacted against Israel following the killing of Hamid. Right. Now, what happened then was an escalation in violence, if you like, tit for tat, a cycle of violence. And then 6 days later, the self-defense operation began with the supposed aim of wiping out Hamas, his military capacity to fire rockets at Israel, which was a failure because obviously rockets have been fired in the last couple of weeks, apparently. So the kind of feeling or the conclusion here is that Israel's treatment of Gaza is barbaric, it's inhumane, and most importantly, it's illegal, not just in the last few weeks or a couple of months, but also historically. And that this falls into a context of Israeli colonization, oppression, and state violence, state-violent treatment of the Palestinian people, something which must be confronted by the international community and international civil society.
Right. So Martin, do you have anything that you want to bounce off of Harry, or anything that you particularly want to respond to?
Listening to Harry, I'm sort of reminded of the joke where a damsel in distress is kidnapped by a vicious criminal, and she's about to be tortured and raped, and Batman sweeps through the window and whacks the villain and rescues the damsel in distress, and everybody's up in arms about superhero brutality. Basically what Harry is doing is completely decoupling the cause and effect here. I don't think there's anyone who really knows or really familiar with the Israeli society, the Israeli political system, who believes for a moment that if there was any real prospect of reaching a harmonious agreement with the Palestinians, there wouldn't be a peaceful settlement years ago. He sort of sugarcoats the Hamas issue. If I remember correctly, I think it was 2007 when the Hamas forcibly took over the Gaza Strip, shooting their fellow Palestinian brethren from Fatah in the knees, pitching them off multi-story buildings. So to portray the Hamas rule as some sort of amicable and peaceful takeover of power is a bit of a stretch of the imagination. And I think there's something deeply anti-Semitic, rather Judeophobic, in trying to condemn Israel for every coercive action that it takes to protect its citizens, whether administrative or whether it's military or whether it's reactive or proactive or punitive or preemptive. Whatever Israel's done is considered an illegal war crime. And basically, at the bottom of that attitude is an extremely racist approach, which means that people expect Jews to die meekly. And anything that the Jews do to prevent themselves dying meekly is portrayed as racism, disproportionate force, and war crimes. It's really so infuriating.
Right. So, Harry, do you have anything that you want to comment on? Because ultimately, just so you know, Harry, it's supposed to be a dialogue between the two of you, and if I can obviously pose I have some questions here that I can obviously pose, but this is definitely a discussion between the two of you, and I'm here really to just push questions along and delegate time. So go ahead.
Okay. There are some things that obviously I have to reply to first. This idea that talking about children being killed and that being morally unacceptable is in some way got anything to do with religion or the ethnic religious group, which is Jews. This is, I mean, if I actually asked my colleague here participating in this discussion to explain why he reached this conclusion, I think that he would not intellectually be able to do that, because it's actually got nothing to do with Judaism or Jewishness or anything of the sort.
No, I didn't say it had that. I said.
Right. So Martin, let Harry finish his point, and then you'll come in, and just because for the video's purposes, it'll be best if it's not.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Harry.
My point here was that international law cannot be anti-Semitic, it cannot be Islamophobic, it cannot be anti-Christian, it cannot be anti-black, anti-white, and etc. It is black and white in this respect. And so when we say that a war crime has been committed, looking at the prima facie legal evidence, trying to suggest that this has got anything to do with Semites or Judaism or Arabs or anything is just absolutely preposterous, and is a kind of effort to cloud over people's intellect rather than be morally outraged at the killing of innocent children, to try and make them feel almost guilty, actually, for sympathizing with families of people who have lost innocence. And it's a very, very strange intellectual ploy. So that would be my first thing. The second would be to acknowledge that when Hamas took power, there was certainly a violent episode of that. Some other historical context would be to say, of course, that the United States and Israel tried a coup to topple Hamas's legitimately democratically mandated power. So the point here is that there is some more nuance to that story that was being injected. But my most crucial retort is this idea that in some way, by being opposed to a political policy which kills children and starves people to death, that's got anything to do with Semites, Jewishness, or Judaism. It doesn't.
Go ahead, Martin. Do you have anything to respond to? Otherwise, I can address the question.
I was just wondering how Harry would reconcile his allegations with the fact that Israel showed great restraint for years and years, in my opinion, completely mistakenly, by absorbing thousands of rockets directed at civilian centers before it chose to react militarily. Firing rockets at civilian centers is a war crime in itself, because whereas civilians are killed by Israeli military action, they really it almost exclusively is a matter of unintended and regrettable and regretted collateral damage, whereas the Palestinians specifically target civilians. And if we're talking about killing children, what about the rocket that hit the school bus? It was purposely aimed for a school bus in the areas bordering the Gaza Strip. I'm not quite sure how that was supposed to advance the Palestinians' fight for freedom. But unless Harry expects Israel to sit back and not react to Palestinian assaults on its civilian centers, I'm not quite sure what kind of action he's taking. As far as civilian casualties, I would refer him to the videotape by Richard Kemp, the commander of British forces in Afghanistan, who stated quite categorically that in the history of warfare, no army has been more mindful of avoiding civilian casualties than the IDF. And of course, he's completely and probably intentionally ignoring the fact that the Hamas use as a purposeful tactic the use of civilian shield to protect their own combatants. This is really a case of the pot calling the kettle black. It's completely detached from context. And while there may be some factual truth to the fact, obviously Palestinian children were killed. The blame for those deaths rests firmly on the Palestinian leadership. If you examine the reaction to civilian casualties, let's take for instance the Kosovo bombings by NATO, where NATO were using high altitude of Serbia, hitting trains on bridges, buses crossing ravines, refugee columns, a foreign embassy, hospitals, old age homes. There was very, very little international outcry about that. So what I'm saying is that criticism of Israel is not necessarily anti-Semitism, but the enduring application of divergent double standards that apply to the Jewish nation state certainly make anti-Semitism an increasingly plausible explanation for it. If you look at the behavior of NATO troops in Afghanistan, where there was tens of thousands of civilian casualties in an operation which was launched for the kind of casualties that Israel was absorbing every week, and no one said anything about that. The inordinate obsession with Israeli means of self-defense, which sometimes may be excessive, which there may not be zero errors in the execution.
The issues here were about double standards and etc. 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 The point here is that I don't see any double standards in my own personal stance, so obviously I can't respond to an allegation which is generic and not against myself. The point here is that Israel has the fourth greatest military in the world. In Gaza, they have probably, well, firstly, no military, but in comparable strength, probably one of the weakest militaries in the world. The point is that, again, if we look at terrorism with any objective or rational sense, and if we also accompany inside the definition of terrorism state as well as private terrorism, we can see that most of the terrorism that takes place in the Israel-Palestine so-called conflict are acts committed by the state of Israel, not by private so-called terrorist groups here in Gaza. And if you look at the chronology and historiology of incidents like, for example, the 8-day War of November, you can again see that Israel actually, in fact, started these aggressions by killing innocents, and that these were responded to, as they always are responded to, with rocket fire by Gaza militants. It even says so on their website. I can send you the link in the discussion.
Oh, well, if they say so, we should no doubt about the veracity of that, if they say so. But I would, instead of living in Gaza, I would perhaps suggest that Harry move over to Sderot, and that might seriously change his view on the necessity of military action. But the point is to get drawn into a discussion of various anecdotal details. It's sort of like being unable to decide that the Nile flows from south to north, because if you follow every curve and bend in the river, sometimes it flows west and sometimes it flows east and sometimes it actually flows southward. So you might lose the big picture. But if you remember when Israel withdrew unilaterally from Gaza, and by the way, from the north of Gaza as well, where there was no Palestinian presence, and it was a geographical continuation of Israel, which completely contradicts Harry's claim about being untenable from the point of view of controlling it. There was virtually no security problem in the north of Gaza. They withdrew from that as well. The withdrawal was driven by something completely different. But if you look what happened, Israel pulled out of Gaza raised all the settlements, permanently dismissing, or should have permanently dismissed the claim that settlements are the cause of the conflict, because there are no settlements left. By the way, in parenthesis, the Jewish population there produced 10% of the GDP of Gaza, supplied quite a significant amount of the employment opportunities. In fact, if there'd have been 10 times more Jewish settlers, the GDP of Gaza would have been 50% higher. But what happened when we withdrew from Gaza? The first thing they did, in some symbolic act, was desecrate all the synagogues which were the only buildings that were standing there. So I'd like to see you rationalize that other than Judophobia. The next thing is that they destroyed all the warehouse, the high-tech greenhouses which supplied livelihood for many people in Gaza, and completely sabotaged a plan by Jewish philanthropists led by the former head of the World Bank to set up an agricultural project there, which really gives you an idea of what the Palestinians are really focusing on. They do not want to set up a state of their own. They want to dismantle the state of the Jews. People talk about the blockade. I'm really willing to put money on it. If there was no blockade, there'd be carnage in the streets of Israel.
Right.
So the blockade of Gaza is not
quickly reply.
The block of just one second. Let me finish the sentence. The blockade of Gaza. The blockade of Gaza is not the cause of Palestinian hostility. It's a consequence of Palestinian hostility. It's not the reason for Palestinian hostility. It's the result of Palestinian hostility. If there was no Palestinian hostility, there would be no blockade. I'm old enough to remember the time when there were convoys of Israeli cars driving into Gaza and driving into Judea and Samaria for trade and buying fruit and garden produce, etc., etc. All of this suddenly came to a shuddering halt when people decided that the peace process would be a good idea, and to hand the administration of the territories over to the Palestinians, first to the Fatah and then to Hamas, who've shown that the only thing that they're capable of establishing is either a corrupt kleptocracy or a tyrannical theocracy, and chronic chaos in both.
Right. Go ahead, Harry.
I will just reply immediately. There are so many things to reply to. The blockade being the Palestinians' own fault, and regular invoking of some idea that this has got something to do with Judaism or Jewishness. The point here is that this conversation and the whole debate falls into the context of what? I'm in Gaza, and we're talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict. It started in 65 years ago, in 1947, 1948, when there was Al-Nakba, the catastrophe, when Israel was made on top of Palestinian land. And this is when the conflict started. Everything that happens now, yesterday, and tomorrow is
the conflict started long before
in the Nakba, al-catastrophe.
Right. So guys, if we can direct the conversation back on Gaza. I mean, Martin, what do you think should be taking place inside of Gaza? What should happen to this piece of land that's not happening right now? What can you give us your take?
Well, if you remember yesterday, I sent you an article that I wrote about Gaza 20 years ago. It might be a good idea if you could forward it to Harry as well. In 1992, I wrote an article predicting what would happen in Gaza when people like Yitzhak Rabin and even the hawkish Moshe Ahrens suggested that we undertake a unilateral withdrawal from Gaza 20 years ago. In fact, Yitzhak Rabin was even more abrasive than that. He said the best solution for Gaza would be for it to sink into the sea. But Moshe Ahrens actually suggested unilateral withdrawal. And what's happening in Gaza now is inevitable in terms of political science. Because if you withdraw, the central authority from an area where there's no tradition of democratic government, no real tradition of civil society, no political institutions, the most extreme elements.
Yeah, just
the most extreme elements take over. If the most extreme elements must take over, Israel has to seal the borders, unless you believe that the carnage of Jews in Israel is an acceptable outcome. If you seal the borders, there will be deprivation and poverty, which will then spill over into attacks against the alleged source of that distress, and then you have caste-led and pillar of defense, etc., etc. So as long as the Gaza stays where it is, under the Palestinian administration, there will be no resolution.
Martin,
there will just be continuing rounds of violence.
Right. Go ahead, Harry. Go ahead,
Martin, Harry. You're giving political, scientific analysis from the point of view of the Israeli state. What should the Israeli state do? Should it withdraw? Should it blockade? And etc. etc. What I want to ask you is, do you accept this country and that this may have something to do with the hostilities that Israel faces?
Sorry, I missed your question. Can you repeat it?
I apologize for the internet connection. Do you accept that there is an occupation of Palestinian land by the Israeli state and that this fact may have something to do with the hostilities that Israel faces as a state?
Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. In Gaza, of Israeli occupation, there are defensive means to protect the Israeli population from what might happen because of the hostility in Gaza. But Israel withdrew from Gaza. In fact, I hope it's been misrepresented, because the Israeli population said we were going to withdraw from Gaza and have nothing to do with it. But we're still supplying water, electricity, humanitarian supplies, etc., etc. So, of course, in Gaza, I mean, the question is trivial. Of course, there's no Israeli population. There are Israeli defensive measures to protect the population from people in Gaza who are trying to harm them precisely because they're Jewish. And read the Hamas charter if you don't think it's because they're Jewish, because they specifically say that the Muslims are charged with killing every last Jew in the world, and if they don't do that, redemption won't come. So let's not try and be naive about what's driving. About the West Bank. I would suggest that you do. You go to the original formulation of the Palestinian Covenant, which was formulated in 1964, when Israel was not holding a square inch of Palestinian territory. Okay, and there they say specifically, they don't imply, they say specifically that the West Bank and Gaza is not part of the Palestinian homeland. I suggest you read it. Okay, and not only that, before the Six-Day War began, you had Ahmed Shukeri, who was the head of the PLO, Arafat's predecessor, who said, "We are going to liberate the homeland." What homeland was he talking about? He wasn't talking about the West Bank or Gaza. That was under Arab rule. In fact, for 2 decades. Let me finish the sentence. For the 2 decades, the areas now that are allegedly the Palestinian homeland were under Arab rule, and there wasn't even a feeble initiative to set up a Palestinian state there. So please, let's try and adhere to some sort of intellectual integrity.
This is such a long point to reply to. Okay, my intellectual integrity is based on international law, which says that Israel is militarily occupying Palestinian territory since 1967. Gaza was dominating military control and West Bank on the ground military occupation. You and I need not debate this. The world accepts international law. The world accepts international law. You may not, but the overwhelming majority of humans on the planet do, which puts you in a very small minority. So we should hurry along to talking about resolution of the conflict and compliance with international law, rather than pretending that Israel does not occupy someone else's country and that Israel was not created on top of someone else's country during 1947-1948 ethnic cleansing processes.
Ultimately, Harry, what should happen in Gaza? Do you accept that Martin says that they get provided electricity and water and other items? And do you just say, when you report inside there, do you just think that more of that sort of resources needs to go into that area, or do you think that, where you think it's not about the resources, it's about the actual treatment of these people, which Martin is saying? I mean, they get specific specific supplies. So can you just go into what you think should actually happen, and go ahead?
Of course. Yeah, I think there are two rounds of issues to address. The first is the fact that Gaza and the development of Gaza has been suffocated by occupation in the last few decades, but also most recently the besiegement policy, which has basically suffocated the Palestinians' ability to pursue happiness, self-determination, and all of the normal that we take for granted, so to speak. The second is addressing the historic base issues of the so-called conflict, which are, for example, the right of return of Palestinian refugees displaced in the Nakba, 1948, the fact that Israel, according to the law, is illegally occupying Palestinian territory, and other such issues which are based in a vision to end the conflict and to cease hostilities. So I think the point here is the debate should move on to how we best see a cessation to the conflict, and how we best resolve these issues of occupation and refugee return.
Do you want me to respond to that?
Yeah, go ahead and respond, and if there's another, go ahead and respond.
First of all, let me say the issue of the Judea and Samaria and the Gaza being Palestinian homeland is a very recent claim, because firstly, as far as Palestinian lands go in Judea and Samaria, up until 1988, the Jordanians were claiming it.
Right.
It was Jordanian territory. So this whole issue of that being a Palestinian territory is a giant hoax. Giant hoax.
Why exactly has the United Nations authorized the acceptance of Palestinian territory in the West Bank and Gaza as being recognized as Palestinian territory if it's Jordanian? Why exactly does the world disagree with you? What is your argument?
For two reasons, I can tell you for two reasons. Because you can check everything I say that in the original Palestinian covenant, Palestinians specifically eschewed any sovereign claim over Judea and Samaria, and specifically Israel was part of Jordan.
I think that there is a very big issue here, which is that Martin and myself, Harry, are finding it difficult to find a middle ground on which to discuss issues intellectually. In a way here, I don't feel that I'm representing or advocating for any kind of Palestinian position, but for international law with the intention of conflict resolution. I'm finding that Martin's arguments are not based with a clear objective to see a resolution of conflict. I'm not understanding what his proposals are. My proposals are to end military occupation and state violence, and to give compensation to victims of state violence.
So you are basically advocating to give the terror organizations in Gaza free rein, if I understand you correctly. So basically what you're saying is the Jews are fair bait.
Harry, did you hear what Martin said?
Oh, operationally, that's
yeah, but I did not catch it.
Yeah, go.
Operationally, what Harry is suggesting.
I did not, to be honest.
Martin, can you repeat your question to Harry so that he can hear you?
Well, what I'm saying is that what basically Harry is suggesting is that Israel desist from any measures that are designed to protect its population, and allow the Palestinian terror organizations complete freedom of action. And basically, as I said before, he's suggesting the Jews are fair bait.
Well, this is absolutely ridiculous. If you want to talk about providing security for Israeli citizens, then we should consider Israel's occupation of another country and the fact that under international law, the occupied people have a right to use violent, armed legally based defense, that will be a problem for Israeli security. So if you withdraw the occupation, if you stop the occupation, there will be no need for any armed resistance, which is based on international law, which will provide security for the Israeli population. It comes up down to this fact that Israel is occupying someone else's country.
Martin, do you think that there's any justification of what Harry is saying, in that if you remove the military resistance, if you remove the military defense forces, that would resort in security measures that Israel wouldn't need to worry about? And if you disagree, can you explain and then maybe throw another question back at Harry?
Well, of course I disagree. As I said before.
So, Noor, did you have something did you want to chime in on anything, Noor? Do you hear us? Noor, are you there?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
I'm a Palestinian from Gaza. Yeah, I can hear you. I'm a Palestinian from Gaza, and I have been listening, and there's some points that I would like to add a comment. I told Harry before that I think my English is not that perfect to really express what I have in mind and heart. I will talk from my heart and just comment on some points that Martin said. If you allow me, can I?
Yeah, go right ahead. Go ahead.
I want to say something about, Martin keeps saying, Jews, Jewish, Judaism, and stuff like that. This is not right. Our fight is with the people who are occupying our land. It's not about a religion or anything. Even if you talk with, Islamic Jihad, which is, the most terrorist organization, according to some people, they will tell you clearly that our issue is not with the Jewish, it's not with the Christian, it's not with anyone. Our problem is the people who occupy us, even if they were even Christians, atheists, whatever. Our problem is with the occupier. About being a terrorist organizations and using violent resistance, at 1948, how we were occupied? By roses? By kisses? No. By tanks, by airplanes, by gunshots, by soldiers. And we have all our right to defend ourselves. It's a human right. What is terrorist is the occupation. It's not defending yourself. Defending yourself is a human right. And it's not a terrorist organization. It's a resistance. And yes, we use rockets, but this is what we can use. We can't control the rockets so they can hit militant places or areas. On the other hand, you can see the Israelis F-16 airplanes attacking civilians' home just to kill the father because he's a part in Hamas government. This is illegal. This is terrorism, and this is what I wanted to say.
So, Martin,
okay.
Go ahead and respond, Martin.
Now it's 2 against 1, so you'll have to give me a little bit more time.
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, it's completely disingenuous, completely dishonest to claim that it's not a matter of being Jewish. Because all you have to do is read the covenant of the Hamas, which is the ruling faction in Gaza, and you can see the violent anti-Semitic language. Rise in revolt. They're being ruled by a Hashemite minority. Why don't they rise in revolt in Jordan? So apparently there's no inherent conflict between their national identity and the ruling regime in Jordan. So when people say Jordan is Palestine, all they're doing is quoting Arab leaders and Jordanian leaders, like, for instance, Zaya Muhsin, like Farouk Kaddoumi, like King Hussein himself. All say that they're all part of one nation. The whole issue against Israel is a giant hoax. The Palestinian issue is a public relations exercise to prise the Jews loose of their nation state. And all the Arab casualties, every single Arab casualty, bottom line, is the result of hostility. if there was no Arab hostage, I know the Israeli society, people with my views were marginalized. When the Oslo agreements were signed, people like me were completely marginalized, paid a huge price for personally and professionally for warning that this process is going to lead to huge tragedy for the Jews and for the Palestinians. Okay, so as I said before, before people decided to embark on the peace process, the standard of living in Judea and Samaria and Gaza was rising at one of the fastest rates in the world. All this came to a shuddering halt when they decided to hand over the administration first to Arafat and then later to the Hamas. I really would like to keep some intellectual integrity in the school. Of course, Palestinian civilians are being killed. They're being killed as regrettable and regretted collateral damage. But the point is, losing a war doesn't give you the moral high ground. Bad aim with your Qassam missiles doesn't mean to say that
there is no war. There is an occupation of someone's country. There is no war. There is the fourth greatest military in the world, and largely defenseless people.
Do you really think by shooting at kindergartens and bazookas at school buses that somehow you're going to prise the occupation loose? Get a grip, guys.
So then, Harry, what takes place next? What next steps really need to take place? Can you kind of map it out for us? What needs to go on? According to.
I think the first thing is that there should be. Yeah, I think the first thing should be that the blockade of Gaza should be lifted. That the undermining and subverting of Palestinian political factions should be ended. This should hopefully facilitate a Palestinian election where a clear referendum can be taken on what Palestinians want for a resolution of the conflict, be it 0 states, 1 state, 2 states, 3 states, 4 states, or 5 states. That this policy can then be moved towards, and exacted in reality. Another very important thing will be the beginning of the dismantling of Israel's military domination over the Palestinians. And this should all be coupled with overwhelming international outrage at human rights abuses on both sides of the wall, and an exacting of the rights of Palestinians in these territories. It's a human rights issue.
Noor, what would you like to see happen? You're a Palestinian. What would you like to see happen? What next steps would you like to see happen in regards to trying to either end the occupation or solve the conflict as a whole? Noor, are you there?
Max, can you repeat that? I did not hear you.
Yeah, Noor, I said what next steps would you like? Yeah, I was saying what next steps would you like to see take place in order to try and resolve this conflict or end what you call the occupation? Can you go through that? Can you tell us what you'd like to see happen?
Yeah, first thing would be to stop the illegal settlements that are being built in West Bank right now, and it's against the international law. This is one. Second, freeing the Palestinian prisoners. Third, lifting the blockade on Gaza. The blockade in Gaza started when Gilad Shalit was captured in Gaza, and now he's free. And the blockade should end, and we should be able to leave Gaza freely. And I think also the international community should accept our government, no matter it's Fatah, Hamas, or anything. Whatever we elect is our choice, and I think that the international community should accept our choice. And I think, for me, I don't believe in two-state solution. I believe in one-state solution with all Palestinians living off the land, Jewish Palestinians, Muslim Palestinians, Christian Palestinians. But the people who occupied our land and came in 1948 are not welcome. They are all occupying our land, and they are not welcome, and they should go back where they came from. because Palestine is for Palestinian, and Palestine is one land for one people.
Max, can we do closing statements for 2 minutes each?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Harry, you could start. Make it, we'll do a closing statement for each of you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to just I'd just like to close now with about 2 minutes of comments. Here we are living in the 21st century, not some other century. And the point here is that the people of the world want the international community and want states to respect human rights. There is a military occupation of Palestinian land, which gains international solidarity. That's why I'm in Gaza, because of the barbarity and the qualitatively desperate nature of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. There should be, as Palestinian English discussion says, a dismantling of the settlements and etc. There should be overwhelming international pressure on the occupying state, call it whatever you want, it's an occupying state, to stop occupying someone else's country. And there should be an addressing of the base issues of this injustice, including that of the right of return of refugees to go back to their land. And the state violence which Israel exacts against Palestinians, including in Gaza, should also be equally condemned, as it's one of the most barbaric set of incidents that humanity has seen in the last 10 years or a few decades.
I'm really disappointed about what I've heard. Let's try and quieten this guy down. I'm very disappointed with the level of the arguments that have been brought forward. When people say we should dismantle the settlements, but in the same breath they say it should be one state for all people. So if you really want one state for all people, why dismantle the settlements? Why not leave them there? And then on the other hand, when you say the settlements are the problem, the settlements were completely demolished in Gaza, and we saw how wonderfully that worked out. But the whole point is that this is a giant hoax. The whole issue of Palestinian nationality is not a genuine, authentic claim for a state. Not because I say so, because they say so. And one thing I will agree with my friends is that Israel's case has been put very poorly on the international stage. And the majority of people do not accept what I say. But you remember, there was a time when the majority of the people believed that the earth was flat, and actually burned people saying it was round.
All right, so guys, just because. Right, so guys, why don't?
This is